I had worked as a activist journalist and had always been on my own and never worked really in an institution before. I mean, I was a professor but a bit of a freewheeler. And so the first time I really was conscious of being a woman, I mean, I always knew I was a woman, but conscious of being a woman at work was when I worked at the White House, when I worked in national security. And the way the NSC was structured, is that you have the National Security Advisor, a bunch of Deputy National Security Advisors, there's a very important speechwriter, there's a head of Homeland Security. So basically there were about, let's say, 7 top national security jobs at the White House for President Obama, who had appointed more women national security cabinet members than anyone in history, no one even close, Janet Napolitano, Susan Rice, Hillary Clinton. So that was the outward facing, and those were the most important appointments, to be clear and to be fair. But of those senior appointments at the White House, all men, initially. It all changed over time. And then the layer that I was part of initially was the sort of assistant secretary level, and there were 26 so-called senior directors for different issues, and I was one of 6 women. And, I couldn't tell whether, when I would make an argument in a meeting and it would land, as my mother would say, like a lead balloon, or I couldn't tell if is it because I'm a novice to this new institute? Am I not framing it? And quick study, so I was figuring things out, got the lingua franca pretty quickly, and learned how to navigate the system as well as I could. So maybe initially it was that, but then I thought, And then I thought, well, maybe it's because I'm always arguing on behalf of human rights, and you're a bit of the skunk at the lawn party, even in an Obama administration. Because there's just so much gravity toward the security relationships and the trade relations. And so when you're like, oh, but what about the prisoners? And so I thought maybe it's that. And I mean, to this day, it was probably a bit of both of those things. But there just was something about the way in entrenched systems where the numbers are off, especially, there's just something different about being a woman. I think there's no question. And the only way I came to know that was, it was a wonderful thing that happened, and it influenced how I handled my service in New York at the UN. One of the other 6 women senior directors invited the women senior directors to have a glass of wine one Wednesday night. And we did a lot of things at the White House, but having wine at 6 o'clock on a Wednesday night, which was basically like noon in most jobs, was not something we had on, but we did. And then we sat, and I started to hear about their experiences. And I just thought, well, that's weird. That sounds exactly, I feel that, and we're all so different, and you've been in government for your whole life, and you hate human rights, and, and you're all having exactly the same experience. Like, okay, this is not, and so this ended up becoming an institutionalized ritual, and we in government, in order to be taken seriously, every process has to have a name. And so the woman who organized this first drink or therapy session, called it the Wednesday group. And so we started putting on our calendars the Wednesday. Now in the Arab Spring, at the height of the Wednesday group would get canceled occasionally. But basically for 1 hour, we would come together, and it was life-changing for me. And this kind of solidarity. And then we would go into meetings, and we would never leave we disagreed again. We were different people. We had different agendas and priorities and so forth. So we disagreed, but we would never leave each other's comments, hanging in the air with the crickets chirping as it happened. So then I go to New York, and the first person I talked to after President Obama said he was going to nominate me was Madeleine Albright. And Madeleine Albright, yay! The first woman Secretary of State, and just a mensch among humans. And she said that the first thing she had done when she was UN ambassador back 20 years before me, exactly, was that she created a group which she called the G7. Now, you've heard of the G7, the group of 7. No, it's the Girl 7. So there were only 7 women ambassadors to the UN in 1993 out of 183 countries. I know. So when I joined, you're going to feel a little bit better, but not that great. There were 37, but there were 193 countries by then, because the world changes. So roughly the same percent. What's fascinating is it parallels parliaments around the world, because it's roughly 24%, which the Prime Minister was saying earlier is the numbers for women around the world. So I created the G37, and me and my sisters would get together, and I brought really different people to join with them and to talk to them. So we brought Gloria Steinem for a dinner with these women, and it was so amazing to see women from the smallest, most impoverished countries and what Gloria Steinem had meant to them. Claire Shipman wrote a book called The Confidence Code, or The Confidence Gap, or the Confidence Gap, and it's actually looking at neuroscience and everything about, and of course sociology and all kinds of empirical work about how different men and women are in group settings and how their confidence varies. So I brought Claire to come and talk about the book to all these ambassadors. They're like, I was wondering what, and them sharing their stories, and just to try to create, because the truth is, as America's ambassador, and I don't know if you felt like this on the global stage, but I was more America than I was a woman ambassador. So it's not like I experienced the kinds of slights, and the UN is one of the most male-dominated institutions in the world, but I wouldn't have experienced that in the way that my women colleagues were, because I was the host country, the donor, the driver of most of the initiatives at the UN. But these other women needed that, and so then we began embarking on initiatives on sexual violence, getting more women police into peacekeeping. And because there aren't that many coalitions within the United Nations that cross all the different regions and socioeconomic levels, so it ended up being a kind of interesting slice. It happened to be a female slice, but it was actually a very heterogeneous slice of the UN itself, and we were thus able to break through and get things done that I think we wouldn't have otherwise. Not enough, and if we'd had more time, we could have gotten more done. Unfortunately, I'll just end by saying I've had many bad ideas in my life, but maybe the worst idea I've had in my professional life was to host an election party with the women ambassadors and Gloria Steinem and Madeleine Albright. Yeah. And to make matters worse, a documentary film crew.
Oh.
Yep.
Well,
so it's all there for the historical record.
It's a great movie, by the way, despite the awkward scene.